Hello, you're watching Property Question Time. My name is Jemma Forte, and this is the property show where you get to ask your questions to a trio of industry experts. So let me introduce you to the panel today. First up, we have Stefano Lucatello, who is a senior partner of Cobalt Law International Property Lawyers. Then we have Mary-Anne Bowring, founding director of the Ringley Group. And last but not least, of course, Paul Mahoney, MD of Nova Financial Group. So we're going to get going because we have so many questions that have come in. And Stefano, I'm going to start with you. This person is saying, I am thinking of gifting my property to my son. He's permanently a resident in France, and I myself am in the UK. And whilst I realise that capital gains tax doesn't apply to gifts of property, I have heard that the tax authorities might deem that the reason for the gift was to avoid capital gains tax and therefore apply it as if it had been a sale. What can I do? Surely they can't just do it on a whim.
Think smart. Always consult an advisor.
Yes.
That's the starting point. I'm taking it that this property is in the United Kingdom.
Yes.
Right, let's take it it's in the United Kingdom.
Yes.
As such, he could gift the property to his son. No problem whatsoever. There shouldn't be a problem for valuation purposes. There shouldn't be an Inland Revenue inquisition as to what's going on. I've never heard of it in 30 odd years of being a solicitor. I suppose it depends which area you are in, but I doubt it very much. You're free to do what you want with your property. I can't see a capital gains tax problem. I can see an inheritance tax problem, possibly if he dies within 7 years, because the gift would be what's called a potentially exempt transfer.
Right.
So if he survives 7 years or more, then the value of the property would not be brought back into a calculation of his estate when he does die.
Okay, that's interesting.
If he does die within that 7 year period,
Yeah.
then various percentages of it would get brought back into the calculation.
Right.
But as such, instead of gifting it outright, he could actually bring his son onto the title so they could become joint tenants, which means that it's probably the cheapest way, legally and any otherwise, to do it. So they're both the joint owners, and if he were to die first, then the property would automatically go to his son.
But then do you have to pay inheritance tax on the 50% at that point?
No.
No. Okay.
You would, because it depends. It very much depends. As it stands at the moment, there is something called the nil rate band. That is the amount of money that you can leave behind without inheritance tax being taxed on your estate.
Yeah.
At the moment, it's 325,000. It's going to remain like that for the next few years. So it would depend on how much the 50% share was worth at the moment of death. That's the moment of valuation, and it depends how far in the future we are and how far that nil rate band has risen. But I think the easiest, the cheapest, and the most effective and practical way of dealing with this would be to actually put his son onto the title, it's a very easy exercise, and it's the simplest and most cost effective.
Yeah, is that quite cheap to do, just changing the name?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, and I guess ultimately you are doing it, aren't you, to avoid tax?
Yeah, absolutely,
You know.
and it also gives you it gives continuing rights, and it sort of eases him onto the title as a half interest shareholder, as it were, of the property. So it's probably the best way to deal with it.
I'm not going to give my house to my kids yet.
No?
No, but they're 13 and 11 and they're just not responsible. One day. Mary-Anne, maybe I will, don't know. This person says, I was wondering whether anyone could help me with this. So I'm in the process of selling my house, and it's only today that I discovered that my house is actually on a leasehold title for 999 years, which started in the 1700s. I probably should have known this before purchasing the property 5 years ago, but I was a first-time buyer and I didn't really know much about it then. I'm sure they're not alone, it is a bit of a minefield. It's a really old stone cottage in a tiny village. When I bought the house, I had to take out indemnity as the title deeds had been lost, so no one knew who owned the house. Obviously how this problem has arisen. So my questions are, number one, is my house a leasehold because the deeds have been lost, or do I have two separate issues? Number two, will this affect me selling the house? And number three, can I turn it from leasehold to freehold, and how is this done? And will I need to reduce the price of my house? There's quite a lot there.
Yeah, well, first I think that one would assume that because you're in a terrace in a very small enclave or village, that probably all the properties are in the same boat. So
yeah.
in theory,
so it's
if
a
you're
little stone house. It's quite cute. A stone cottage.
if it's a stone cottage and they were the original workers' cottage, perhaps to a castle in the grounds of, then there should be probably other properties that are similar in the same scenario.
Right.
Whether any, if you like, defect or abnormality on title affects the purchase price depends on what else is available. If all the other cottages in the village are available freehold and yours is the only leasehold, then yes, your price is going to be depressed.
Right.
But if everybody who wants to live in that village has to accept leasehold title, then that is the normal price for that property. You've got quite a long lease. I don't believe it's leasehold just because the deeds were lost.
Right.
But title indemnity insurance is available for defects or missing or undisclosed title.
Okay, so they've got that, so that's good.
And it wasn't until 1925 that it became obligatory to register, or the land registry came into being as we know it today. So because this lease is, 1700s,
so old, yeah.
it's so old, who knows what happened then.
They might have bought it for a cow and a sheep or
The
something.
people aren't around to tell us what really went on.
No.
But in terms of having a lease, you've got over 600 years left, so it is a long lease. Leases don't adversely affect mortgage valuations until sort of 70 years, so that's not a worry in theory. In terms of buying the freehold of the property, that depends if it's Crown land or land that's restricted from being sold freehold.
Right,
If
which
it
is why it might be leasehold in the first place.
It's beginning to lead me to think it may well be on some special land. If that's not the case, then yes, you can. The 1967 Act is the one that applies to, sets out the valuation formula to buy houses.
Okay.
And it will be based on the ground rent and a modern ground rent for that property.
Okay. So it sounds like a chat with the neighbours is a good idea, actually.
Well, yeah, first of all, pop down the pub and see who else has got a leasehold house and what their experiences are.
Yeah.
But then, yes, you need to find out who the freeholder is. That should be well known and a well-established piece of information.
Okay.
And that'll set out whether you can get your freehold or not. But in terms of it, its market is supply and demand. As I said, if all the houses are leasehold, then there is no difference.
Yeah.
If yours is special and unique, then yes, it will probably depress the price.
Okay. And can I just say 10 out of 10 for remembering every part of that question? That was quite amazing, wasn't it? Amazing. Thank you so much. That's a really good answer. Okay, Paul, this person says, I'm looking for some advice on the best course of action to pursue. I am looking to buy my first house or flat, but the aim is to rent it out, so a buy-to-let mortgage is what I need to look at getting. I have a tied cottage with my job, so will not be living in the property, so this is why it will be rented out. What's the best option to go on? Because I know banks don't like giving a first-time buyer a buy-to-let mortgage. I'm aware of the other regulations around the different types of mortgages and that at least a 25% deposit is required, which I have the savings for to cover this large deposit.
Okay. I think there's a couple of parts to that question. The mention about buying the first property and whether that becomes a buy-to-let because of the tied cottage or whether they're buying a buy-to-let anyway is something that needs to be determined there, I suppose, from a property perspective. And on the mortgage side, there isn't really, there's just the option of the first-time buyer mortgage, isn't there? You know, they are a first-time buyer.
Yeah.
They said there that lenders don't like lending to first-time buyers. That's not necessarily true. Different lenders have different criteria.
Okay.
So some lenders just won't lend to first-time buyers, whereas others will. Some lenders will look solely at the property and the rent that property generates, and not so much at the person who's buying. And others want to look very much at the person who's buying. So there's a very broad criteria out there from a mortgage perspective. There would likely be options available to this person, especially given they said they've got the 25% deposit. There would quite likely be options available depending on their financial position, the property they're planning to buy.
Yeah.
So far as other options, what they should buy, so far as from a property perspective, will be determined, I think, by whether they plan to use that for personal use in the future.
In the future, yeah.
Or whether
Okay.
this is solely just an investment.
Yes, okay.
Sounds
like it is going to be their first house or flat, but they're just not in a position at the moment. At least this is what I glean from this. To live there, there's no point at the moment.
Well, they have the tied cottage, so it doesn't make any much sense. So if that's the case, if they're buying the place to live, then that's a personal decision. You know, they're going to buy somewhere that they like, that they're comfortable, all those sorts of things, which doesn't necessarily transfer to what makes sense as a buy-to-let.
Right.
Because that's nothing to do with what they like.
Yeah.
It's about what the target market likes and wants.
Right.
So, you know, personal is obviously very emotional, whereas investing should be very much commercially minded and unemotional.
Yes.
So they need to make that decision.
Okay. So they could get a buy-to-let mortgage, though.
Quite likely. There's limited information
Not impossible.
there.
Yeah.
Certainly not impossible for first-time buyers to get a buy-to-let mortgage.
Yeah.
There are quite a lot of lenders that will do it, but there's a range of other criteria that comes into play.
Yeah.
For example, their income. Some lenders will look at the property, where it is, what it is, the value of the property,
and what their personal situation is. And this is the thing that always amazes me about this show, is there are so many unique situations that come up. This is why we never run out of questions, because people are like, this is my situation. So I guess that's where you've got to just go, this is it. Tell me, and just be honest.
Yeah, and it can be a bit of a minefield. And what they shouldn't do is just go down to their local bank. Or the bank they've currently dealt with, because they have one set of criteria.
Yes, I remember doing that. Like, I went to my bank, and then I sort of was just like, ooh. And then you go to a broker, and
maybe that would work. Maybe they'd be extremely lucky and their bank would work. But there's over 1,000 buy-to-let products in the market.
Yeah, I think it's too bespoke.
Half of them are only available to intermediaries, so brokers. So you're limiting yourself very much by trying to go out and navigate that minefield yourself.
Yes. I loved it when I saw a broker, also because they can just break it down for you. Without, it's not an idiot's guide, but it's kind of, here is the clear information that you need to know. And I've got all the kind of complex issues at the back.
Well, it's like being sick and Googling your symptoms. It's going
that's never a good idea.
to lead you down the wrong path, isn't it? Whereas if you're sick, you go to the doctor, you'll find out what's wrong with you.
And this is why my partner thought he had pleurisy, but he didn't. He just slightly hurt his rib. That's another story. Okay, thank you so much, guys. That is it for the first part of Property Question Time. We've got a short break now, and I'll see you after. Welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time with me, Jemma Forte, and my trio of industry experts, Paul Mahoney, Mary-Anne Bowring, and Stefano Lucatello. Right, Stefano, I'm going to hit you with a question next, if I may. So, this is a goodie. We're in the process of buying a house in France, and they've put an exclamation mark because I think they are excited. When we viewed the house, it still contained a lot of furniture and personal items, as the elderly owner had gone into a home. Well, that's a bit sad, isn't it? Anyway, the barn was also full of large hay bales. Now, you will correct me because I know you speak so many languages. The immobilier.
Immobilier.
What is that? Is that?
It's the estate agent.
Thank you, immobilier. You would know that one. Assured us that it would all be clear before we take over. And to be honest, if the house wasn't clear, it wouldn't be the end of the world. But the hay in the barn would be a problem. Very heavy, isn't it? We've signed the compromise and the 10 days has expired. So I know we should make an arrangement to view the house again on the day we sign, which will probably be next month. But if the house hasn't been cleared, I'm not sure of how to approach things.
Yes, well, vacant possession. That's the answer. It's the same as it is in England. You buy a house, it should be with vacant possession unless the contract says otherwise.
We've got really nice furniture.
Vacant possession doesn't necessarily mean free of people.
Okay.
It means also free of stuff.
Yeah.
Right. In view of the fact that buying a property which has a barn, presumably it's in some sort of agricultural area, and either it comes with horses or it has horses, and therefore they've either made hay bales out of it, or the next door neighbour is a farmer and he or she has rented the barn out and has put his or her bales of hay into it.
Yeah.
But either way, the compromis de vente, which is the contract, should well, it does under French law, because it's very consumer orientated, have a clause in it which says the property will be sold with vacant possession. And it then goes on to say of stuff and people. And unless you put a condition in it saying on completion the house will be sold with vacant possession except for, then that would be a breach of contract. My view would be that before you, if he's been and they're going again, I would go before completion and I would be speaking to the farmer next door or whoever it is and finding out where these hay bales come from. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you need to get them removed if you don't want them, or you could make an arrangement with the seller that you get them but the next door neighbour comes and collects them on the day of completion, you sell them or whatever. You may be able to make some money out of them. I don't know.
eBay.
Well, probably
eBale.
probably eBale, yes, .com. Yes, it'd be easier to go to the farmer next door and say, I've got these hay bales, do you want them or don't you want them, or do you know someone? I would have thought it'd be very easy. It's not a problem. It's not a real problem. The other thing that French law dictates is that when you buy a property abroad, as you do in most countries, when you buy a property abroad, the furniture and the stuff that's in the house usually comes with the house, unless there are certain effects of value that or sentimental value which the vendor wants to keep. And there is always an annex, an appendix 1, 2 and 3 of what is left in each room. And if you don't want it, you will then say, I don't want this stuff, dispose of it, and it's their obligation to dispose of it on or before completion.
So when you say their obligation, in
The
this
vendors.
case, is it the elderly person who's gone into
Yes.
a home and they're not going to be
Well, they probably have a
possibly-
grandson or a granddaughter
Yeah.
or a child.
What if they don't?
Well, if they don't, then it's up to you really to negotiate with the estate agent, and the estate agent is fundamental because they do much more than they do in the United Kingdom. They arrange everything.
Not possible. Joke.
I wouldn't be able to comment on that really, but yes, that's the point. Your focal point is the agent immobilier, the estate agent. Ask him or her to
Okay,
sort it.
to sort
They
it
should
out.
sort it for you.
We might have to pay a bit extra.
You
for
might
that,
have to,
or-
but you might get it
yeah.
back on the sale of the hay bales. you know.
Okay, all right then.
If not, buy 2 horses.
Yeah, or have a barn dance.
A barn dance.
Yeah,
Yes.
do hot dogs and stuff. Okay, Mary-Anne, on to you now. This person says, I'm trying to make sense of the title register on a flat that I'm going to see. It looks like the new owner was registered in 2015, but there's no sale in that year on the land registry's price sold data. I assume this means the lease was transferred to them, probate, gift, etc., rather than sold. The lease length is also very different to what I was told, 89 years rather than 114. If the lease had been extended, would this be registered on the title? It all seems very strange.
Okay, so you have said that the transaction was registered, just that the price wasn't registered.
Yes.
So that means it's a transfer perhaps for no consideration,
Right.
which could be probate, it could be
Okay.
a gift, it could be a number of different types of exempt transfer.
Right.
So the most important thing is that you're buying the property from the current registered owner. So that hurdle is ticked. Going on to the next hurdle, in terms of the lease length, people often quote the lease as what it was originally. So if it was 125 years or 115 years originally, those numbers stick in people's head. But what you actually buy is a residue of what is left of the lease.
Got you, yeah.
So the 89 years is what is left today.
Right. Which is fine.
Fine, you're fine till about 80, and then it begins to become a problem. And you should always extend it before it becomes 80, because it's significantly cheaper.
Oh, really? Oh, right, okay. So almost maybe 5 years in, do it then just to get it
Well,
out of the
you
way.
can do it at 80 and a half years, but you need to do it before 80, otherwise you
Okay.
have to compensate the landlord more for the extra years that you're buying.
Okay.
In terms of the lease extension, if a lease extension has happened, it should be registered. If the only reason it wouldn't be registered is because a solicitor forgot to do it or something went wrong, which is
Right.
highly unlikely. Highly unlikely. So I would suggest that a lease extension hasn't happened and that someone has imagined the lease was 114 years
Yeah,
when
and
it
it's
isn't.
like a slip of the tongue.
So yes, they can extend it quite easily. They have to either have lived there for 2 years and serve a Section 42 notice to do it, or they can persuade the seller to serve a Section 43 notice, exercising their right, which you then inherit.
Okay.
A couple of dangers come with that, because the price may not be determined even if you inherit the right, but that may be the case later anyway.
Okay.
But of course, as the lease is getting shorter, it will be cheaper to extend now than it would in 2 years' time.
Got you. And can I just ask, When you are extending a lease, does it cost more if the property is bigger, or is it just like a cost? Because a lease is a lease. Is it quite standard?
No.
No, it isn't.
There's about 13 different variables which go into the lease extension,
okay.
but in simple terms, the ground rent is a variable, the current value of the property is a variable, and the length of the lease is a variable.
Okay.
So yeah, there's
So
a lot
I want
of
a kind of like
variables.
2-bed flat in a sort of mid place, in London, say. What
Yeah,
you
but a
looking? Are you
two-bed
looking
flat in London could be 200,000 in Tottenham, it could be £2 million in Chelsea.
Okay, so
There is no
here's a
straight
better
answer
question.
to
Here's
your
a better
question.
question. Is it hundreds of pounds or is it thousands of pounds?
If you're in perhaps the outer London boroughs, it could range from 5 to 20,000. If you're in the inner London boroughs, it could well be several hundred thousand.
And this is why
It depends on the length
an
of the
issue.
lease.
Yeah, because it is a really substantial amount of
You
money.
can extend your lease right down to it having 6 months left on it.
Right.
So, extending a lease at 81 years and extending the lease at half a year.
Yeah. Okay.
The question you're asking is impossible
it's
to
just
answer.
how long is a piece of string?
Well,
But essentially, it's a really substantial cost, and when buying a leasehold property, you've got to think.
yeah,
properly
there's a
about
whole
it.
area of specialist valuation
Yeah.
advice that you need to delve into.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'm asking on behalf of people who've got no clue. Did you see that? It was good. Right.